Hey friends, what's up? And welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Gimel, Daf 3 of Masechta Yevamos. Friends, Daf 3 is not quite as insane as Daf 2, I think, in terms of I don't think it's gonna bend your mind as much, but whatever. We're basically continuing to talk, to analyze the Mishnah and kind of understand the order of the Mishnah and the contents of the Mishnah. So friends, we're going to start on Daf Beis, and Beis is about 6 lines from the bottom. Michtei, Kulu ma'achos isha, yalfinon lesnei achos isha bereisha. So the Gemara wants to know. Then we're going to learn on Daf Gimel and Beis that technically, really the only erva that's written in the context of Yibum is really the sister of your wife, right? You can't have a situation where you're going to be marrying doing Yibum with the sister of your wife, right? So for example, if Reuven and Shimon are brothers, and then Sarah and Rivka are sisters, and then Reuven dies, so Shimon wouldn't do Yibum with Sarah because Sarah is his wife Rivka's sister. And then we learn out all the other arayos from there. So now, so if we learn out all of the arayos from the sister of your wife, so then lesni achos isha bereisha. So let's teach that one first, if that's sort of the main source of all of them. If you want to say, well, there was a specific order to the Mishnah. The order was that it started with the most serious crimes, the most serious punishments, right? So meaning, for example, if a person sleeps with his daughter, so that's Sreifa, right? Also his mother-in-law, right? So that's Sreifa. So now it's Machlokas and Masechta Sanhedrin about what is the most sort of stringent punishment. Is it Skila? Is it Sreifa? So it's Machlokas between Reb Shimon and... Who's Machlokas between Reb Shimon and... I can't remember what's Machlokas between. But Reb Shimon's opinion is that the most... maybe it's Reb Yehuda? I can't remember. So Reb Shimon's opinion, though, is that the most stringent, the most severe of the 4 capital punishments is Sreifa. So therefore, right, if you're going to say, Tana Chume Nakat, if you're going to say, well, we mentioned sort of the most stringent, the most severe punishments first. So we started with daughter, mother-in-law, those kinds of things, which are Sreifa. Reb Shimoni, and the author of our Mishnah is Reb Shimon, Damar Sreifa Chamur, who says that Sreifa, burning, is the most serious, the most stringent of the most severe of the capital punishments. And that's why we started with daughter, because if you sleep with your daughter, that's Sreifa. If that's the case, then why start with daughter? Technically start with your mother-in-law, because technically Sreifa, the pasuk is written in the context of your mother-in-law, so therefore your mother-in-law should come first. And more so, if we are doing things based on how stringent they are, well then, after your mother-in-law should come your daughter-in-law. Now, your daughter-in-law, if we look at the Mishnah, is all the way at the end. But your daughter, right, Debasu Sreifa Skila, Chamura, because according to Reb Shimon, Sreifa is the most severe of the capital punishments, but then comes Skila. And if you sleep with your daughter-in-law, the punishment is Skila, is stoning. And therefore, technically speaking, if we're going based on the order of stringent, severe punishments, so then after sort of like your daughter and your mother-in-law should come your daughter-in-law, which is Skila. But we don't talk about that, right? We get into your sister and things like that, which is Karis, which is not as stringent as Skila. I mean, it's pretty serious, but Ella Bito, rather, here's the reason why we start with your daughter, because Kevin do Asya Midrasha Chavivale. That's brilliant. We've seen this before in looks like Masechta Rosh Hashanah, but Kevin do Asya Midrasha Chavivale. That since so the Tana of our Mishnah is one of the rabbis, and since the learning out that one is not allowed to be with his daughter comes from a drasha. It's not explicitly written in the Torah. Now, your daughter is written specifically in the Torah because it says, right, Isha Ovita, you're not allowed to be with a woman and her daughter. So Memele, you're not allowed to be with your wife and your daughter, who is your wife's daughter. But so this, as we learned in Masechta Chagiga, is referring to out of rape or some other non-marriage union. So in that case, there is no pasuk, and we only know that you're chayiv, that you're not allowed to be with that daughter, out of wedlock. So from a drasha, and therefore, whoever's compiling the Mishnah was, sort of, what's the word? Biased or whatever, sort of was more interested in, like rabbinic kind of drashas. So therefore, we listed, Bito first, because Bito Me'anusaso, comes from a drasha as opposed from directly in the psukim. So we sort of give, sort of precedence to that. So kulunami midrasha asu. So, but then the Gemara says, one second, but we just said that basically all of them come from drashas, right? We said that we have achos isha, but we learn out everything else from there. So all of them are drashas, not just bito. So answer the Gemara, nihidil inyan yibum asu midrasha. Even though, yes, sure, in the context of yibum, we learn out all of the other examples from a drasha, coming from achos isha. But ikar isurayu behejiksiv. But nonetheless, like don't sleep with your sister, that kind of stuff. That's just like written straight up in psukim, and therefore, sort of it's not as exciting for the Tana to list. But Bito is completely Behu, right? Bito, when it comes to his daughter, ikar isur midrasha. Really, the ikar. The only way we know about Bito me'anusaso, from a union out of wedlock, so is from a drasha. Damar Rava, as Rava said, and we learned this in Masechta Chagiga. Amar li Rav Yitzchak bar Avdimi, said Rav Yitzchak bar Avdimi to me, Asya hena hena asya zima zima, that we learn out from the Gzer Shav of hena hena. That is how we learn that you cannot be with your daughter, right? Bito me'anusaso, a daughter from out of wedlock. Asya zima zima, and we learn out the punishment for that, which is sreifa, also from Gzer Shav of zima zima. Now, says the Gemara, Hashda Amart, but one second, if we're saying that we like to give precedence to sort of drushes, well then lesni la'achos isha levasof. Well, if that's the case, well, out of all these 15, there's only one example which is not a drasha, one example which is specific in the psukim, which is achos isha, right? The sister of your wife. So if that's the least interesting, so put that last. So I did the Ari Be'isr Achvisa Tana Achos Ishto. So the Gemara says, well, Enochinami. Yeah, from an interest standpoint, maybe Achos Ishto is the least interesting, and that should go at the end. However, if we look in context in the Mishnah, at that point it was already talking about, what was it saying? It was saying Achos Imo. Right, achoso me'imo achosimo. So we also listed achos ishto because it made sense in context, even though yes, technically from an interest standpoint, maybe it should go last. Right. So again, I did the ari be'isr achvos hatana achos ishto v'nisnaye lahai bove levaso. But one second, why don't we just teach that whole section of the Mishnah at the end, right? If we're saying that achos ishto is the least interesting, so that whole thing about achos me'imo and what do we say? Achos me'imo, achos imo. Let's just teach that whole chunk at the very end, and then achos ishto will be at the very end if it's the least interesting. So ela tana kurve naka. No, so rather the Tana was doing it based on how close they are to you. So Tana bito, right? Starts, for example, with your daughter. Uvas bito, and then your daughter's daughter, uvas beno, and the daughter of his son. The krove atzmo, that they come directly from him, his daughter, his daughter's daughter, his son's daughter. Then once he mentions the 3 generations from him, right? His daughter, his daughter's daughter, his son's daughter. So then also he mentioned 3 generations from his wife, right? His wife's daughter, his wife's daughter's daughter, his wife's son's daughter. So the idea the Tana shlosha doris lamata dida, and then once it mentions 3 generations below, Tana shlosha doris lamala dida. So then it mentions 3 generations above, right? Mother-in-law, mother-in-law's mother, father-in-law's mother. V'tana achoso V'achos imo dekrovei atzmo, and then we mentioned his sister, his mother's sister, that they're also kind of blood relatives to him. V'aydi da'ari be'isr achva, and then once already we're talking about brothers and stuff. Tana achos ishto, we mentioned the sister of his wife. Uvdinu deliktme lichaloso mikame eshes achiv shloi ba'olamo. Now technically, we should also mention his daughter-in-law before his brother who didn't actually live at the same time as him, Tilomishum Kurva Hu, because that one is not about Huda Asira, because that isn't because of coming from you or whatever. Ella, however, because already we're talking about, brothers and sisters, so we mention also your brother that never overlap with you in the world, and then at the end, we get to sort of your daughter-in-law. Okay? Now, Frekti Gemara, my area detana potris, lesni osris. Now, 1 second. How come the Mishnah chose to use the lashon of the potris? How come the Mishnah chose to use the lashon of that? Let's say the Shimon's daughter who was married to Shimon's brother Ruvain, and then Ruvain dies. So it says that Sarah is poteres like all of her tzaras. Why not say that they make them osir? That all of the tzaras are osir to Shimon. So itana osris hava mina osir liyabim aval michalitz chalza komashmala. Well, if it would say osris, I might think, well, it's osir to do yibum, but maybe they would still have to do chalitza. Okay, v'lisnei asura lachlot. So then why not just say that? Okay, now it's osir for Rivka to even do chalitza with Shimon, right? Let alone yibum. So my kavit, but why would you say that it's also to do chalitza? Who cares? Let her do chalitza. What's the big deal? So alam alo, right? So, right, but then the Gemara says, what do you mean it's no big deal to do chalitza? It's a huge deal. Yata omer choletzes misyabemes, right? That if you would say that you're allowed to do chalitza, then you're allowed to do yibum, right? Meaning, if we would say that it's meaning, right? We say asur lachlos. Why don't we say that, right? We should just say that it's asur to do chalitza, and then memele you don't do yibum. And then the Gemara says, what do you mean? But it's not asur to do chalitza. Who cares? Do chalitza. The Gemara says, what do you mean? Who cares? Just do chalitza. If you do chalitza, then you're going to say, well, you only have to do chalitza in a situation where you would otherwise be doing yibum, and therefore I might think that actually you would do yibum in this case. So therefore it would make sense to say that it's asur to do chalitza, to make it clear that it actually is asur to do chalitza. So then how come it says potris and not asur lachlot? So, and for the Gemara, well, because Kevin the makom mitzvah huda asira tzara v'shelo b'makom mitzvah shaya mishumach itani potris, because the tzara is only asur, right? So if we take the example of Shimon's daughter Sarah was married to Ruvain, to Shimon's brother Ruvain, and Rivka was a co-wife of Sarah. So then, only in that case, if Ruvain dies, do we say that that Rivka, the co-wife of Sarah, is asur to Shimon? However, what if things were a little bit differently? What if Shimon's daughter Sarah was married to just some random dude? And when Sarah was married to that random dude, there was a co-wife, Rivka. Now, if that random dude dies, Shimon would be allowed to marry his daughter Sarah's co-wife from that period. So therefore we see that this idea of the co-wife being asur to Shimon is only in the context of yibum, but it's mutter in other cases. And if the Torah would say asur, I might think that it's asur even in other cases. Therefore it says pater to say that only in the context of yibum, Rivka, doesn't do yibum with Shimon, but in other cases, like if it was just like a regular marriage and then the husband dies, Rivka would be allowed to marry Shimon. My area ditani mina chalitza mina yibum. And how come the Mishnah points out chalitza before yibum? Lesni mina yibum lichudei. Why does it say from chalitza and from yibum? Just say from that you're pater from yibum. So itana mina yibum. Well, if we would just say that they don't do yibum, havamina michalitz chalza yavumi lo miyabma. Well, if we would just say that they don't do yibum, so then I would think that, okay, maybe they don't do yibum, but they still would do chalitza. Kamash Malan, that it says that they don't do that they don't do yibum or chalitza. That kol ha'ola liyibum ola lechalitza. That only somebody who is relevant for yibum does chalitza, v'chosheino ola liyibum, eino ola chalitza, and that if yibum is not shaykh, so then chalitza is not shaykh. So there's never going to be a situation where you don't do yibum, but you do chalitza. Okay, v'lesni mina yibum mina chalitza, inami mina chalitza lichuda. So then, okay, but still, why? Fine. So we said that you want to mention from chalitza and yibum, because if it would only say yibum, I might think that you're doing that. Maybe you don't do yibum, but you would do chalitza. And we say no, only right when you do, only when yibum is shaykh do you do chalitza. If yibum is not shaykh, you don't do chalitza. But 1 second, why say right? Still, why don't you do mina yibum mina chalitza? Right? If yibum is like the main event, so why don't you do right? Why you should list yibum first? Why are we listing chalitza first? Right? So it's chalitza mina yibum. Say yibum mina chalitza, which is the main thing. Inami mina chalitza l'chuda. Just mention chalitza, and of course, if she's parted from chalitza, memela, she's parted from yibum. So Abba Shauli, the Omer mitzvahs chalitza kodemis mitzvahs yibum. So the Gemara answers that the Mishnah is the opinion of Abba Shaul, who says that precedence goes to chalitza. That we don't, we don't really do yibum. That precedence, the precedence goes to chalitza. Now, effect the Gemara. Minyana duration l'muteimai, minyana d'sefer l'muteimai. So the Mishnah had mentioned, of course, at the very beginning of the Mishnah, chomish esrei noshim poters tzarasein, etc., that there are 15 women who are poter their tzaris, etc. Then at the end we said, right, at the end of like the first part of the Mishnah, we said, harei elu poters tzarasein, etc. These, i.e. these 15, are poter their tzaros and all these things. So how come we mentioned 15 at the beginning and essentially 15 at the end as well? So minyana d'reisha l'muteimai, minyana d'sefer l'muteimai. How come we mention 15 at the beginning and 15 at the end? So, and for the Gemara, dim'ute dirav udirav asi. To exclude Rav and Rav Asi. What did Rav and Rav Asi say? So Rav said that if you have a sota, right? If you have Ruvain is married to Sarah and Rivka, Sarah turns out to be a sota. So Rav says that in this case of the sota, so both the sota and her co-wife, right? If Ruvain dies, right? So Ruvain is married to Sarah and Rivka. Sarah is a sota. Ruvain then dies. So Sarah and Rivka would be poter from yibum. And we're saying that no, only the 15 cases in the Mishnah are poter, but not that case, right? They would be chayiv in yibum. And Rav Asi says the case of an Ilonis, right? Reuven is married to 2 wives, Sarah and Rivka. Sarah is an Ilonis. She will never reach puberty. She's incapable of having children. And then Reuven dies. So Rav Asi says that both Sarah and Rivka are going to be poter from yibum. The Gemara is saying no, right? The Mishnah is saying no. These 15 are poter from yibum, but not an Ilonis, not a sota. Fine. L'Rav Asi l'muteimai. Now, fact the Gemara that according to Rav and Rav Asi, so what is the Mishnah excluding, right? Meaning, because if according to Rav and Rav Asi, they say that both by an Ilonis and by a sota, so they would not do chalitza. So then, what is being excluded? I'm sorry, they would not do, right, chalitza or yibum. So then what is being excluded by the Mishnah when it says 15? So what's it excluding? So isvir ludadade. So if they agree with each other, so both Rav and Rav Asi agree that both in the case of Ilonis and in the case of sota, there would not be chalitza and yibum. So then, what are the 2 things that are being excluded? Chad l'mutei tzaras mima enes. So one is to exclude the tzara of mima enes, meaning if Ruvain is married to Sarah and Rivka, Sarah is a minor, and then Ruvain dies, and then after Ruvain dies, Sarah decides that she is not interested in doing yibum with Shimon, so then she refuses at that point. So we say that at that point, Rivka would not be a poter from yibum. Rather, she would do chalitza. Okay, fine. V'chada lim'ute tzaras machzir grushaso. right? That the halacha is that if Ruvain is married to Sarah, and then they get divorced, and then Sarah marries some other random person, and then, I don't know, he dies, whatever, and then, so she's not allowed to get remarried to Ruvain, right? Kilu, if Ruvain and Sarah get divorced, they're allowed to get remarried immediately. But if in between she gets married to somebody else, she's not allowed to go back to Ruvain. Now, what if he did marry her again? And not only did he marry her, he also married Rivka. So basically there's two, right, there's co-wives, and one of them, right, Sarah, however, was not allowed to remarry Ruvain. So in that case, and then Ruvain dies, and they don't have any children. So in that case also, we would not say that Rivka is potter, rather she would do chalitza. Fine. And if they do not agree with the other, so if Rav only says that Yibum does not apply to the case of Sota, however, it does apply in the case of Ilonis, and Ravasi holds the opposite. So Chad Lamute Dechavre V'Chad Lamute Otzaris Memenes Otzaris Machzir Grushaso. So let's do that again. So Chad Lamute Dechavre, right? So one would be to exclude the other one, right? So for example, if Rav holds that by Sota, so the tzara would be exempt from Yibum and Chalitza, but by Ilonis she would be Chayeves. So then when we say 15, so 15, we said 15 at the beginning and 15 at the end. So one of them is to exclude Ilonis, that she would be Chayeves. And then the other one is the Mutei O Tzaras Mimenes, or Tzaras Machzir Grusha. So either it would exclude this minor who refuses, or this woman who kind of came back to her husband when she wasn't allowed to. The Rav, okay, fine, period. So both according to Rav and according to Ravasi, if they only hold of their opinion but not of the other one, so then one would be to exclude the other opinion, and the other one would be to include to exclude either Tzaras Mimenes or Tzaras Machzir Grusha. So the Rav Asi lesnu. Now according to Rav and according to Rav Asi, if Ilonis and Sota are being included in sort of the exemption of Yibum, so why not list them in the Mishnah? So the Fishenim B'tzar is Tzar. Well, because our Mishnah was listing things, right, that sort of it applies to the erva and to their co-wife and to their co-wives, etc. Whereas Rav and Ravasi would say that doesn't necessarily apply to the co-wives of the co-wives, just to the sort of first degree co-wives. Now, so how do we know all this stuff? How do we know, right, that they're also the ervas also, and the tzaras and all that stuff? The Tanur Rabbanan, that the rabbis taught Isha elachosa, that a woman and her sister lo sikach do not take litzura to make them co-wives legalos ervas aleh b'chayel, to reveal her nakedness upon her in her life. So we see Isha elachosa, that you cannot be with your wife and her sister. So aleha, when it says aleha matam lomer, what's the deal with the word aleha, upon her? So the Fishneimer Yevamo Yava aleha. Well, it says aleha in the case of arayos, right? When it mentions a sister, a wife and her sister, your wife and her sister. And it also says aleha in the context of yibum. Shume'ani afilu ba'achas mikol arayos ha'amura ba Torah akosov midaber. I'm sorry, so again, so the Fisha Nemar, because the pasuk says Yevamo Yava aleh, that it says in the context of Yibum, that, if Ruvain dies and they don't have any children, so then his wife Sarah marries Shimon. So I might think Shume'ani, I might think Afilu b'achas mikol arayos ha'amuz bator. I might even think that if that could even apply if it's arayos. So akos medaber. So Nemar kan aleh, Nemar hadun aleh. So we say, wait, but it says aleh by Yibum, and it says aleh by arayos. Malahalim b'makom mitzvah, just like when it says aleh in the context of Yibum, it's talking about a mitzvah. Afkan also by arayos b'makom mitzvah, and we apply it in the context of a mitzvah. Ayi Yibum v'amrachman lo sikach, and we're saying do not, right? It says by erva, it says isha elachosa lo sikach ayi. So we're comparing arayos to Yibum, and we're saying that that Yibum is called off in the context of Arayos, i.e. in the context of your wife and her sister. So you would call off Yibum. Ve'en li ela hi tzaras minayin. All I know is her. How do I know also about any co-wife that she has? Tamalom l'tzror. Therefore it says her co-wife. Ve'en li ela tzaras minayin. And all I know is her co-wife. How do I know her co-wives, and that whole thing? So tamalom l'tzror v'lo l'tzur. It says l'tzror, which is like multiple, as opposed to latzur would be like, I guess, just one co-wife. Now, all I know is your wife's sister. How do I know all of these other arouse, the 15 things that we listed in the Mishnah? So, Amart, ma'achos isha miuchedes. Well, if we look at the sister of your wife, shehi erva v'chayavan azdona karis v'ashigas achatas. So your sister's wife is arayos that you're a chayav. If you sleep with her intentionally, so you'd be chayav kares, and by accident you'd be chayav a korban chatas v'asur liyavam, and it's also right. We don't do yibum. So av kol shehi erva v'chayavan azdona karis v'ashigas achatas. So also in any situation where there is arayos, and you're chayav kares intentionally, and shogeg you'd be chayav chatas. Right now, I imagine the point is that even in the situations where we said earlier that you'd be chayav skila or sreifa, that's only if there's like warning and stuff. But if there's no warning, I imagine you'd be chayav kares. So if it's intentional, so asur liyavam. So in all of those other cases where there would be arayos, so we would say that you would not do yibum either. Ve'en li ela hein tzarosei minayin. So, but I only know them. How do we know that it also applies to the tzaras? Amrit ma'achos isha. When it comes to the sister of your wife, miuchedes, she erva v'chayavan azdona kares v'ashigas achatas, is something that you're chayav intentionally kares, and by accident korban chatas v'asur liyavam v'tzarasa asura, and your wife's sisters tzaras are also asur. So af kol she erva v'chayavan azdona kares v'ashigas achatas v'asur liyavam tzarasa asura. So therefore, also in any situation where it is arayos and your chayav intentionally kares, and by accident korban chatas, they would be aser as well as their tzar. Mikana muchacham, from the chacham it said chomish esu inoshim potris tzarosein mitzaros tzarosein mina chalitzu mina yibum atzof ha'olam. And this is how the rabbis learned out that in these 15 cases, so these women would be pater from yibum as well as their tzaras and their tzaras in all of indefinitely for all of these 15 cases. Now, fact the Gemara yachol shani marbe af sheish arayos chamuris meelu she would say asuris. Maybe I'll think that even the remaining 6 arayos will say that their tzaros are forbidden. So, for example, right, we had mentioned in the Mishnah, like your sister from your mother, right? But what about like your sister from your father, right? So let's say you have Ruvain and Shimon, right? We don't mention in the Mishnah that if Ruvain and Shimon have a sister, Sarah, right? So all from the same father. So we don't mention there because, like, obviously, Sarah is not going to be marrying Ruvain, right? However, what if Sarah marries some other guy, right? And then, I don't know, he dies or whatever. So, and at the time that she was married, she was also married to Rivka, who was some other woman. So I might think that maybe, since Ruvain and Shimon aren't allowed to marry Sarah, so I would think that maybe also they can't marry any of Sarah's co-wives if, like, Sarah's husband dies or whatever. So right? So again, is it possible that I'll include also the other 6 arayos that are like paternally based? So Shiyutzar was saying asuras that their tzaras would be asur. Amar to ma'achos ishto miuchedes, say, well, the sister of your wife is unique. She erva v'chayavan azdona kares v'ashigas achatas, that it is an erva and you're chayav on intentionally kares and by accident chatas v'efshali nasi la'achim, and she's allowed to be married to the and she can get married to any of the other brothers, right? So, for example, so if Shimon is married to Rivka, so Rivka's sister Sarah is not allowed to marry Shimon, but she can marry the brother. She can marry Reuven. So ve'asura liyavam, and we're saying that if Sarah was married to Reuven and Reuven dies, Sarah would not do Yibum with Shimon. Vitzarasa Asura, and then also Rivka's Sarah's Tzaras are also. So Af Kol Shi Erva V'Chayav Nazdona Karis V'Ashiga Sachata. So also similar to the sister of your wife. So any situation where you would be it's an erva that you're chayiv intentionally karis and by accident chatas ve'efshali nasi la'achim, and crucially she would be allowed to marry the brothers and basur liyavam, and is also for yavam tzarasa asura. So then the tzara is asur yatsu sheish arayos chamurus me'elu, to the exclusion of these paternally based arayos hold efshali nasi la'achim, since they're not able to marry the brothers. For example, like your sister, their sister wouldn't be able to marry them. So tzara saying mutaros, their tzaras are permitted shein tzara ela me'ach, because the concept of the tzara only comes in a situation where there's like, in the context of yibum from the brother. Asara shamaynu onesh minayin. All I know is the warning. How do I know that there's a punishment involved as well? So Amarkra ki kol asher yaisim kol toevos v'gomer. So the pasuk says, anybody who does these toevas is going to get karis. So we see that there's a punishment as well. Friends, that was the Daf Gimel of Masechta Yevamos. We talked about kind of the order of the things listed in the Mishnah. That we said it basically, was loosely based on kind of people that were like closely related to the person, it's like his daughter and granddaughters and stuff like that, and kind of built out from there. We learned that only in a situation where Yibum applies is where Chalitza applies, but if Yibum does not apply, then Chalitza does not apply either. And then we kind of learned out the source of, all this stuff, like the Arayos and the Tzaras and the Tzaras and stuff, and that it really all originates from the pasuk that talks about your wife, and that you're not allowed to marry your wife and her sister, and it says Alea, and we make the Gzer Shava to Yibum, and then from there we kind of learn it to all situations where you're chayav, it's an erva, and you're chayav karis intentionally, and you bring a korban chatas unintentionally. Friends, peace out.